The website was changed the day before. Before that, it said in the morning, it said it said last night, and then when I looked at it, half a little bit, you want to leave that in the back up in the chat, reading the email. And I think it's, Cece had got an email.
Maybe five.
Paul told me on the phone.
No. So I think because I guess because I'm fairly new, but
She said, don't mention.
I've gotten Paul's emails. Did you see? Somebody said that.
It came from both accounts based on what we heard today. Based on video.
Probably have to find a parking lot.
As of 3-4 weeks ago.
Okay, well, see that last meeting is when I got voted in. That's why.
Okay.
I posted it to the Facebook page after I talked to Paul.
Well, see, I saw it there. That's why I had seen it, but I just happened to go on there because I was looking for this event.
So we do have. Yeah.
They're all salty. They're all salty. We opened them all.
Your TV.
We opened them already. They're all salty.
There's it. Those two stacks right there.
I mean, sausage and pepperoni.
Those two
I
up the
think
board,
sausage
that'd be
is
nice.
pepperoni.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. The front,
Really good. I love, Grant County put theirs on their website the whole year.
Are you still going to tomorrow? Okay. There you go. There's
Well,
yeah.
okay, you're going to go to the event tomorrow night. Okay. And there's also got about a fancy function on the 13th.
I like back to that too.
That's fine.
I'll be more.
Hi, we ate together, but I didn't introduce myself. I'm Diana. Very nice.
Well, I've had this.
You'll be part of it in my life. Water went to work, just like big boys, all kinds of times that come on. The other day, she said, out of bed, she said, what is the meaning of get inside your building? Inside your building, get to the elevator, and think, oh my God, I left my keys. She goes back out to the car, she left it in the car, the car wrecked. And I said, good tonight. Mine was. I know I've got my hands on
Are you going to the one in Leon County next Tuesday, 7th? Yeah, it's both of those, Leon County Facebook page. So, They'll tell them, people are. Go halfway. Yeah, I've not been there before. I don't know about that. I didn't talk to them about that. Oh, maybe not. Ken Uncle passed away. And so he's going to do family in the area tomorrow, and then the people on that's the key. That's
Dr. Dave is 1 minute away.
Did you get my phone? Did you know that I called you today? This morning? You got 8 this morning when I saw you.
Hello, how you doing? I want to do that.
Buddy. Yeah, well, I didn't. No, no, it's okay. In case we have 2 or 3 people watching.
in about 3 hands.
Kathy?
He's blown away.
I won't do it, but it makes it It's hard enough to keep track. Taking care of that. Going to somebody else's district is overwhelming. I'm all about
Is
that.
it good enough? You see that okay?
Oh, yeah, sure.
All right. Great. How are you?
Who's got enough pizza? There's more where that came from. We appreciate you being here tonight for Republican Party of Brazos County installment of Pizza and Politics with Dr. Dave McIntyre. Those of you who are not familiar with Dr. McIntyre, you're in for a real treat. His depth of knowledge is nothing short of incredible. But I also applaud him because anytime he's called upon to help us out within the party, he is willing to help. And so many of us have watched our favorite evening propaganda, and that's what this was kind of born out of. And for you College Station High School students, thank you very much for being here. I got to give you a big applause. You're in for a real treat, and you can go back and you can tell your classmates, hey, you missed it. This is very informative stuff here, because he'll be very in-depth. You have a bio of Dr. McIntyre here. We wanted to make sense of everything that's going on in the Middle East. When you do turn on the evening news, it's virtually impossible to make sense of what's going on in the Middle East. But when we turned to Dr. McIntyre, he immediately said, yes, I'll do that. We were able to put together a date that matched up. So without saying too much, Dr. McIntyre, thank you very much for being here.
Tell me what our timeline is exactly.
You have the floor for however long you want.
It's college professors
You can take
a 3-hour block. You know how that works. So.
If you could take some questions.
I'll do that. I just, we talking, we work from 30 minutes or 45 minutes or
An hour?
Hour's fine. So we're gonna round it off at an hour.
You got it.
Okay. So
All right.
talk for a
Y'all
while,
good
then
with
we
that?
If y'all want to stop for questions during it, it's okay. Raise your hand. If we don't get done with my slides, that's all right. This is for what you want to talk about. All right. So we'll just play it that way. But I always like to know, it's very important that the speaker and the audience have similar expectations of how long the presentation is going to go. Here's the title, and I'll get to the very end about why I think this question about making the world a better place is really important. It's not something, frankly, that I think we've had as a core part of our issue, our message, our narrative as Republicans. What I'm going to suggest to you before the night out is essentially this. The wheels have come off of all of the theories about which our government runs. The international theories, the domestic theories, the education theories, the economic theories. The way our government operates essentially springs from academia. And since World War II, when we suddenly found ourselves a huge player on the world stage, we've been working from a series of academic theories. And the wheels have come off all of them at the same time. What's next? And so essentially what I'm going to suggest to you is that at the very end is that the Republican Party wants to seize this moment when it comes. It is very clear that the ideas of our political opponents don't work. We're going to have to do better than simply keeping our mouth shut and hoping they have a big enough disaster that come election day, people will vote for us instead of them. We're going to have to actually advance some positive ideas. So that's my core message. I watched the. You're sure you can see this, right? All right,
Yes.
good. I watch the news just like you do. The difference is I've done about 1,000 spots on radio and television since 9/11. And so all the time, Kathy and I watch the news and we see somebody come up and hear him talking. We say, who's that guy? What does he know about that? I've been working for that for 20 years. Never heard of him. Who's that guy? So here's who that guy is. I mean, I think I owe you a visit. I began working strategic issues in 1987 when I was assigned, after about 15, 18 years of my career, I was assigned to the Army Chief of Staff's office. And it really was a revelation to move from tanks and reconnaissance to the question of how big the world is and how the military works and how it plays with the Department of State. And that became my job. So for 2 years, I did the chief's testimony to Congress and spent every year explaining what the Army does. Spent a year crafting the argument that goes before Congress every February. What is it the Army does? How does it fit into the larger picture domestically and internationally? And that was my start. Based on that, I spent 4 years working for the Commander of U.S. Forces in the Pacific as a speechwriter. So that's second and third 4 stars that I worked for in 6 years, all 6 years as a writer. He owned everything from the coast of California to the far edge of India, about 250,000 troops, 2,500 aircraft, 250 ships. And I did everything in 4 years working for him, from promotion of PFC Schmedlap to presentations to 50 ambassadors at the same time, and the culmination was the presentation of the Pacific Strategy, first to Colin Powell and then to President Clinton. From there, I went to the National War College, where I spent a couple of years trying to establish a reputation. Was selected at the National War College to be their follow-on dean, and I ended up spending 8 years there, retired from my career as the dean of faculty at the National War College. And what all this gave me was a perspective on how operations really work at the bottom, how we fit in with the Department of State, how all the agencies of the government work together, how the budgeting process works and how that plays, how international parties see us and think about us. It really gave me a vision for the world that I was just very lucky to have an access at a particular moment in time as the wall was coming down, strategies were being recast. While I was at the National War College, a document was published in 1997 called the Quadrennial Defense Review. Newt Gingrich in the House said that he was concerned that the Clinton administration was not spending its money in the Department of Defense to advance the interest of the United States and to look at war fighting. Instead, he was spending too much money out of the Department of Defense looking at other issues besides military and security issues. So he asked that once every 4 years, they wrote it into law, the Department of Defense would have to review itself and say what strategy we have and what resources we have and are they matched up. And that is today called the Quadrennial Defense Review. We just finished another one this last year. And Congressman Chairman Gingrich also required that the first time one was published that another panel looked at the DoD review, because he didn't really trust the DoD to do its own review. That was called the National Defense Panel. And that group in 1997 published a document that for the first time used 2 words. One was transformation, the other was Homeland Security. And what they argued was that because of the advances in technology, warfare was being transformed and big weapons were going to be available to small people. And as a result, if the Department of Defense didn't get its act together, eventually terrorism was going to come to our shores, and the Department of Defense would find itself in charge of fighting here at home. And so DoD needed to reorganize, think this, find other approaches. And the term they used was, we're going to have to begin thinking about in 1997, 4 years before 9/11, we're going to have to begin thinking about Homeland Security. Now, one of my students from the National War College was actually on the panel that drafted that report. And I asked her, what were you guys thinking to use the word Homeland Security? Nobody ever heard it before. It sounds, faintly fascist, like it came from Europe. Where did that come from, Homeland Security? And she said, Dave, we ran out of time. The report was due in December. Everybody knew what we meant. We just couldn't find a word. So we just said Homeland Security. We had no idea that it ended up being spot welded into American law, American culture, American government. So that's the way we got Homeland Security in the United States. It was a good report and a curious term they used, and now here we are. And so because of that report, because of my interest, we created a course. One of my faculty members actually did the work. I helped with him in the design. We created a course in Homeland Security to National War College first course in the United States in 1999. When I retired in the summer of 2001, I went to work for the guy who had run my course in Homeland Security as his deputy in the first think tank in the United States, formed focused on Homeland Security. And that's where I was on 9/11. And so from that moment, it's really been a foot race. And I have remained engaged with Homeland Security from the question of how does this fit in at the national level? Now, what I didn't know at the time, I got budgeting, I got federal government, I got how the government's structured, I got overseas connections, I understand the intelligence community. What I didn't get, I didn't know at all. I did not understand the local component of Homeland Security. I didn't know anything about fire or police or public health or emergency management or FEMA or any of the things that we now have wrapped together with the strategic concept of Homeland Security. And that's what I've been working on for the last 15 years. I've taught since 9/11 just right out 50 courses in Homeland Security, Homeland Defense, or National Security. And so that's sort of the background I bring here to you tonight. And I'm sorry about the long run through, but I think you deserve to know. So, okay, I think this, what difference does that make? I'm trying to offer you my benefit of 25-year study on these issues. Lastly, I'm going to explain what I do. When I say strategic analysis, you know, I don't have any expertise in World War II submarines. I was not on Saipan or Tarawa. I did not fly in a B-29 or B-17. I have no personal experience in what happened in the Pacific in World War II. But here's what I can explain to you. I can explain to you, now I am worried about the map, but stay with me and I'll work with you. I can explain to you how the United States approached World War II strategically. I can explain to you that MacArthur launched out of Australia into the Solomon Islands and up New Guinea and into the Philippines to the Philippine Sea. His plan was to take Taiwan and move on to Japan. And that Nimitz argued so strongly with MacArthur that Roosevelt essentially built him a separate army. They built MacArthur a navy and Nimitz an army because they could not get along. And that's just the truth. And he attacked up through the islands, the Marshalls and into Okinawa and so forth. And that turned out being a big disadvantage to the Japanese because we have enough resources to attack on two axes, and they had to defend on two axes. So they had to come and send their troops and occupy those islands. And you all, most of you are at an age where you know the story of the island hopping campaigns of MacArthur and Nimitz, all that rings a bell. Here's what you probably don't know. We never faced more than about 30% of the Japanese army. Our fight never faced more than about 30%. Why is that? Because the submarine campaigns sank their shipping before their troops could get to the islands. And that's what I mean when I say I do strategic analysis. That's the piece that I look at, and that's the lens that I'll offer you in what's going on today around the world. I don't know the difference between some parts of ISIS and Ishkabibble. I'm not interested in that level of who's the king for a day today. I am very interested in the question of how do you go about doing this. I can explain, for example, when our people talk, oh, and by the way, Navy, you know, has a great reputation, well-deserved, for looking in the 1930s about how to fight Japan. One thing they never foresaw was that the war would be brought to the end by air power and not by sea power, flying off of, launching off of Titanium. So here's a little interesting comparison I'll make for you when we say strategic, what can you do? The airways are flooded with people talking about boots on the ground and how we're going to fight ISIS, boots on the ground. What we do, boots on the ground. I'm not going to offer you Dave's solution. I'm just going to tell you there are lots of ways to do business besides just what the talking heads are talking about. And here's my example. Now, how did we win from a strategic perspective? How did we win the Indian Wars? You know, we had lots of people at the time that could look at an arrow and tell you the difference between a Creek and an Arapaho and a Blackfoot and a Sioux and a Mescalero Apache. And, you know, ultimately that didn't make a difference. You know what made a difference? General Cook killed the buffalo. That's how we ended the Indian Wars. This is not what many of you learned, oh, the evil white man simply went out for hunting pleasure and killed all the buffalo. This is how we eliminated their logistics. That was their food. That was their shelter. That's how they stayed alive. We eliminated the buffalo and used starvation to run them onto the reservations. I don't know how we're going to go after ISIS. I'm just suggesting to you there are lots of ways besides sending folks from the 82nd Airborne Division to stomp across Iraq and root them out one at a time. So with that as a little background, here's what I'm not going to talk into some international issues. I'm not going to talk about these domestic issues unless you want to at the Q&A. These is a governmental catastrophe. This is not a political disagreement. This is not, the idea that the ATF would run 2,000 high-powered, many of them automatic weapons, some of 50 caliber sniper rifles, would run them intentionally across the Mexican border. That's not a political disagreement. It's a freaking stupid, somebody should be fired from the top and work their way on down. What in the world were they thinking? I'll tell you what I'm afraid they were thinking. Some people have argued, though, this was the way they were going to try to ensnare, people. Yeah, I'll tell you what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about somebody in the ATF knew exactly what they were doing in delivering 2,000 weapons to the cartels. If you think we're not penetrated, you're mistaken. And nobody has investigated that to the ground, and nobody wants to. I mean, every one of these is there's some catastrophic government misbehavior. Did you know that the DEA published a document? They've done more domestic wiretapping. This is not some right-wing blog. This is the New York Times. DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, has done more intercept of U.S. domestic telephone calls than NSA. And they then published a document explaining to local police forces how to explain how they might have gotten that information and thus avoiding discovery to the defense. That's a felony. And the DEA published it. The FBI did the same thing. I'm not Obama. I'm telling you, the bureaucracy of the United States government is out of control. And this Bureau of Management, Customs and Border Protection. I have nothing but the highest for the men eat supper with their kids, kiss their wife or husband, strap on a sidearm, and spend the next life in the border in dark by themselves. I have nothing but the highest respect for them. But last week, the head of Homeland, Jay Johnson, signed a very interesting order taking the internal from Customs and Border Protection and converting them into a full-fledged, full-powered criminal investigative unit. What's the difference? Internal Affairs and Law Enforcement reports to the Chief of Police or the head of the department and says, here's the misbehavior we think we've identified. Criminal investigation goes straight to the Department of Justice and says, here's the guys you need to indict. Big difference. Bypasses the chain of command, goes straight to indictment. Now, maybe that's because they have so much misbehavior in customs and they've been so penetrated that they need that additional power to see what's going on. I hope not, but that's the best case. The best case is that they've been so penetrated that they need criminal investigative power to look at their own members. The worst case is this is a very clever way to be able to shut up the members of the customs who've been complaining about the way the government's not doing its own job. We just had today in the Decatur story about 3 women who are in custody along the southern part of the border. They're coming across with this flood of children, charging that they've been sexually abused by members of CBP or someone else while they're being held. Now, if that's true, those guys should be prosecuted. But being charged with that is a very convenient way to shut up somebody who might otherwise want to talk to the media about what's going on along the border. Either way, we have a catastrophe going on there. So we can talk about these issues if you want, but I'm telling you, this is all domestic, it's all bad news, it's not my focus tonight. I'm going to focus on global issues, and we have to do a little bit of background. Please bear with me. We just have to have a little background so that we can communicate clearly. We have to get these terms right. Look, there are tribes and groups and relationships and clans all over the planet, and we haven't paid much attention to them. In fact, our theories in political science, the theories by which our Department of State operates and has for 50, 60 years, completely ignores them. Political science, international affairs, international relations tell you that human politics takes place at 3 levels. The first is between individuals. It's constant negotiation. We going to the mall or we're not going to the mall? What movie are we going to see? Well, who are we inviting for Christmas? This is personal, interfamily negotiation of power. Then there's within states. And you see that. That's what happens when we have state elections and city. Political, international affairs, international relations ignores those two issues. And they focus entirely on the dynamics of what happens between states. The problem is, if what's really motivating the situation is at a lower level, like, for example, religion, it becomes invisible to the people who are supposed to be figuring out how international democracy, how international diplomacy works, because they don't consider that personal relationship. They don't consider that tribal relationship. They don't consider those things that motivate people within the state. They only look at the interaction between states. And so you get a vision from the embassy that says the Iraqi army is ready to go. It's an army, right? Until you find out that it is completely shredded by rival allegiances and incompetencies and officers from one clan and soldiers from another clan. And by the way, there's a report today that said we may be facing the same problem with the army in Afghanistan when we turn them loose in about 6 months. So our theories by which we operate as a nation, coming out of academia, do not explain the world that we're living in today. So let's get these terms right. We got tribes, we got nations. What's a nation? What is a nation? A nation is a group of people larger than a tribe who feel pulled together by some bonds of kinship. It may be a religious bond, it may be a cultural bond, it may be a genetic bond. The Kurds are a nation. They don't have a state. They're distributed between Turkey and Syria and Iraq, but they have kept their culture long enough that they feel they are a single group of people. And so they don't necessarily want to bow down to the Iraqi government, or the Syrian government, or the Turkish government. They would like to break off from Turkey. It would horrify us, Turkey. There are many states in the world that are very worried about letting any group break off because they're comprised of lots of little groups. And if one of them gets away, some others might want to get away. India is a great example. Winston Churchill said, India is not a nation. India is a group of tribes with a flag. And so his argument is, if we let the Sikhs go, then the next group will go, the next group will go. So the Kurds are a nation, and we have been fighting that. We have been fighting that since the beginning of the Iraq War. We do not want to give them what they want, separation from the Iraqi government. Why? Because as soon as they get it, their cousins across the border in Turkey are going to say, we want it too. Turkey's a NATO ally. Now we're pulled into a civil war in Turkey. So the good guys we're trying to arm and get to fight ISIS, those guys, we've been telling for 15 years, you can't have weapons because we're afraid you'll use them to isolate yourself from the Iraqi government. That's a nation. Israel was a nation for many years before it was a state. It was a nation for 2,000 years without having a state. They still felt a community. Then there are nation states. That's the most powerful type of international organization. It is a group of people who have a boundary. They can defend that boundary. They can impose laws. They can defend those laws. That's a state. And besides that, they're both pulled together by some sense of kinship. That is what we used to be in the United States, a nation state, where we felt that we had some sort of association with every American. We had some core values that we all agreed upon. And I'd suggest to you that's under stress today. And the last type of political organization is an empire. And that's one that's powerful enough to glue together a bunch of smaller units or smaller elements. Empires can get very large. The problem is, as soon as they come under stress, everybody abandons them. Nobody fights for an empire. Empires are very big and powerful until the moment they aren't. The Roman Empire, the Carthaginian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, the British Empire, they're very large until somebody demonstrates they can get away with breaking off. And when that happens, it falls apart because the folks from Nepal, not necessarily enthusiastic about fighting for the British Empire and the British king or queen. They might fight for money, not necessarily for the British king. So you got those definitions? Let's work our way through there. Here are the theories that have fallen apart that we used to operate by, and there are really two of them. One of them is the theory that peace comes about by the concentration of. And so if you can make yourself strong enough, then you can You can deter troublemakers. You can sort of step on problems early on. You can put down people that are going to cause problems for the world. And if you're just strong enough to do that. That's the theory that we use for deterrence all the way through the Cold War. It used to be something that was bipartisan in nature. When we looked overseas, we said if America's, whether you were a Republican or none, a conservative Democrat, you agreed that if the United States was strong enough, then it could defend itself and the rest of the world, and it could keep down people who were problems. And so that became our theory for how we were going to operate. That turned from that, after the fall of the wall, into the group that's called roughly the neocons in the Republican Party. So the question is, once we no longer need this big power of deterrence in 1989, when the Soviet Union goes away, what do you do? We no longer need this massive military for deterrence. Do we pull it down? Do we keep some of it? Are we worried about defense? Or, this became their answer, or do you establish hegemony? Do you make the argument, does your theory become, if the United States is the unipower, strongest power in the world, then we can essentially, what do you need?
So,
That's it.
did anybody drop keys out in the parking lot? I just wanted to know before you left.
All right. So the argument became, after 1989, if we're strong enough, if we're the unipower, if we tell people what to do, we'll do it right, they'll cooperate because it's in their best interest, and we can then manage the world. Yeah. Now, I worked this for 15 years in the Department of Defense. So I see people throw rocks at Dick Cheney. I've seen them argue with the decision they were making going into Iraq. I won't watch my time and be respectful. But I'm telling you exactly what I've been in so many arguments with people. Oh, Dick Cheney was only interested in oil for Halliburton. Just ridiculous. Here's what the theory was, because I handled the documents. I wrote the speeches. I understand. The day before President Clinton took office, on the 19th of January, 1993, Secretary Cheney published a document. He was then Secretary of Defense. Published a document that was the future strategy for the world. And he was asked, why would we publish a document looking at a global strategy on the day before you're moving out of power? You know that you're not going to be here day after tomorrow. Why would you publish that strategy? I have a copy at my office stacked up somewhere. I mean, this is a public document. Nothing secret. And the argument was, we will be the hegemon, the controller of the world. And we'll do that by identifying 4 areas in the world that are most concerned to us: Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. And we will establish forward bases and very strong forces in those 4 areas. And if we are challenged in those 4 areas, we will be able to conduct regime change to overthrow any leaders that will not go along with the way we see the order for the world. And the rest of the world, we sort of back off on Africa and so forth to kind of take care of itself. But we'll establish strong forces in those 4 areas, and we will look to reach out and change regimes. And that's the strategy that Secretary published the day before President Clinton took office. Who was behind helping to write that? All of the people who then came to power under President Bush 43. So Richard Pearl, what's his name, Wolfowitz, just work your way on down the list of what's called the neocon. And that's the approach they had of how we're going to use diplomacy and the military beginning in 2001. And so that was the approach they had after 9/11. Well, here's our chance to establish one of those 4 centers, and we're going to establish it in Iraq. And once we have eliminated the threat in Iraq, once they welcome us with flowers for ousting Saddam, we will be able to establish a base there and conduct regime change as required in that region to maintain order. This is not some secret thing, this is public. The problem is that theory, the culmination of 50 years of thinking from the end of World War II, that theory just completely flawed. Just people wouldn't do it. The Iraqis didn't see the world that way. They didn't see themselves as a government, a country that was going to come together and we were going to have a government, like they have in Texas. They saw questions of religion, Shia and Sunni. They saw questions of ethnicity. Are you a Sunni or are you a Kurd? Are you from Mosul? Where are you from? They saw all those questions as the way their society was going to be divided. And they had no intention of cooperating with us. And so that theory by which we pursued the Iraq War ran aground. It's not a matter of being good or bad, or George Bush was foolish, or Vice President wanted to go get oil. None of that's true. What's true is they were working by a theory they thought was going to work, and that theory of human nature and how nations work didn't work. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Afghanistan. It's not the way people operate. And so, since that time, the Republicans have been struggling to get their feet into them and articulate the vision of national defense, national security. Those names have sort of disappeared. And we're kind of stuck without a theory right now of how to move forward. On the Democratic side, the real turning point was in the middle of the Clinton administration. You may remember he was being beaten up very bad about what was your theory? Why are you saying one thing to China and then another group goes and tells China a different thing? How can you align what you want to do and your values? Your whole idea here is that if we just get the right values, if we can get everybody to embrace democracy and diversity, then that will lead to peace. And that's been the concept on the left since 1945. It's actually been the concept of the left since 1919. International affairs was invented at the University of Glasgow, Scotland. So this is the concept. We just have democracy. We just instituted values. That all came together with the Secretary. Now her name has slipped my mind. Madeleine Albright at the beginning of this Clinton second term, and she made 4 speeches. One was at Rice, and she laid out the theory of international affairs, international relations that the Democrats have been using since that time. And that theory says that values, spreading democracy and diversity worldwide is a survival interest for the United States. Because all of our wars come from when we don't have enough diversity and not everybody gets a voice and we don't have democracy. That's the origin of wars. So our job, our Department of Defense, our Secretary of State, our economy, our job overseas is to promote democracy everywhere. Under the theory that if everybody else's life, we use American power to make everybody else's life better off, we'll be better. So these are the 2 major theories that have motivated your Department of Defense, your Secretary of State, your Commerce Department for the last 50 years. And as we'll see in just a second, this is where the wheels have come off of this. It's been very clear